Hey everybody, welcome to today's podcast. I'm Michael Ekpe with my partner in crime, Andrew Maguire. Today we're kicking things off talking about the journey so far, how we met, a little bit about Leap, and what you can expect from subsequent podcasts. So welcome and I hope you enjoy the episode. So Andrew, I was just before we dive in, I was having a conversation recently, and people were trying to figure out how you guys working together as two founders. Um, and it took me back to a conversation we had. I don't know if you remember when we hit a crossroads about 18 months ago. So, you and I were working for this consultancy that we shall not name. And I remember I even went back to look at the text messages. There was a conversation about not allowing your brand, which is stronger, to be overtaken by a much weaker brand. In fact, I think you went along the lines of I would much appreciate my brand working alongside a stronger brand where both are bringing value to each other. I think for broader context, the idea was both of us had been comfortable being, if you like, backing vocals, well-paid backing vocals. We were in the background doing what we needed to do. But we had a choice then to either take the main stage and lead from the front in terms of running our own thing. And that decision, I often look back on as one of the key decisions that we made really early on. And it's actually reflective of a lot of the things we've done since. So yeah, I thought I'd share that, given that came to mind recently. But anyway, I think we should go all the way back to that very first meeting that we had when we both worked at a startup in London. I don't know, it's probably better you tell the story because I had a different color to it, and I often avoid the obvious leaving you in the lurch. So yeah, why don't you kick off?
When you say a different color, what do you mean? What's your different perspective?
Well, at times I think I missed out the crucial bit of leaving you to pay the bill
Oh,
at the end of our
that's good.
lunch. Yeah, so why don't you kick off and then we can make sure we cover that part off.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it's interesting. How many years ago was that? That was 2021 or 2022?
4 years, yeah, 21.
Yeah, that was middle of COVID. Yeah, it was an interesting meet. I mean, I used to have this thing as head of client solutions or head of technical solutions for clients at Smart, where I used to try and meet every new joiner, right? For a couple of personal selfish reasons. One is I was trying to build allies across the organization because as a solution architect, you kind of like can't operate without the knowledge of other people. So every new joiner, I try and make sure I get to meet them. So, but the other reason also was just trying to get them to understand what they're coming into. It's interesting. Whenever I'd see, having worked in startup, I've worked in corporate and then startups for a while. A lot of us struggle when we come from corporate into the startup world. So, whenever I see people coming in from corporate, I'd go, let me reach out and just see where they are on that spectrum of corporate startup and trying to just make sure that transition is as smooth as possible because yeah, it's just a very different ballgame. But yeah, it's interesting how we met and we just seemed to kick it off almost instantaneously. Like it just the conversation felt very natural, organic. As much as I keep saying for selfish reasons, I literally didn't have any ulterior motive. I wasn't like thinking one day we'll start a business with this guy or we'll end up doing stuff. I just thought, let's meet this guy, see what he's up to. And yeah, it was interesting to hear about your background, what you've done. Obviously, keep coming with a lot of, pedigree and skill set to the organization and coming into ADAP. So it was interesting to see how, from my point of view, I was like, I like people like you coming in to succeed. It's a shame when people like with your skill sets and come into organization and then the politics sucks you into a vortex. And then you lose and the organization loses and we all lose, right? So it was good. It was good. It's good timing. Good timing. And yeah, obviously we went on to work quite well together for quite a long time. So
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I would go as far as saying that meeting In fact, us connecting on the call before the meeting was part of my soft landing into
Mm,
smart, because I've come from a corporate background, as you know. And you always have this perception of startups being, like the Wild West, where people are just all over the place and, lots of egos and so on. So meeting someone who is reasonable, who knew their own limitations, who was great at what they did, and took a keen interest in seeing other people succeed was completely different to what I expected. And
mm,
actually, that meeting and our subsequent conversations were part of my navigation. It really helped me get things done at Smart. In fact, one of the things you said to me in that meeting was, in a startup, the number one objective for the founders is to make payroll. It's not
yeah.
all of this other stuff. So even though you're coming with a corporate background and these things are important, the pecking order here is slightly different. So yeah, I was able to read the organization much better, appreciate where to throw my efforts in terms of quick wins, in terms of building credibility. That really helped, and also understanding where the power plays were, which often when you come into an organization, fresh off the street, those are the things that can really cripple your momentum. So I really enjoyed that, and yeah, I think on the back of that, it became clear that we saw the world in a similar way, which I
Mm,
really liked. And yeah, it helped that once you have someone who's got really similar principles to you, but also has such a different skill set to you, in a funny way, just felt like it was meant to be. So yeah, I reflect on that fondly, and I have lots of conversations with people who keep saying, "Oh, this chap, how long have you known him? How did you meet, and what's going on?" So yeah, that's
yeah, I
my
mean,
take on it.
it was interesting because, and I think a lot of those lessons, now that we're reflecting on them, actually will come in quite handy with Leap if we can reflect on them. And so, one of them was going back to that statement about making payroll. Is startups are very interesting creatures, right? They paint a very interesting picture to the outside world, right? So it's funny you thought it's chaos coming, but a lot of people come to startups feeling like I'm coming into a family. It's fun. There's pool tables, there's PlayStations, and it's this. If I'm coming from corporate, I'm coming from a suited up environment to a dressed down environment where I'll play hard and work hard, but it's collegiate and it's friendly and it's in some aspects of it I like that, but certain other aspects are completely just you couldn't be farther from the truth, right? In other words, so a startup is in this world where you're trying to navigate a new world that doesn't exist, right? You're exploring new territory, so to speak. You're trying to attract people onto that journey, right? And you're trying to paint a picture that this journey will be exciting, and you're trying to kind of like not hide, but smooth over the rough edges of that journey, right? And that
Yeah,
that that's an environment that's very tough. But ultimately, you're still running a business, right? And then you also have this interesting dynamic where, especially if it's a startup where they're raising capital to do this exploration that they're doing, they're not a business from day one where they're going to generate revenue. You then quickly realize there's two dynamics at play, right? On one hand, they're trying to attract customers to validate the idea they have. On the other hand, the founders' actual customers are the investors who are buying stakes in the company, if that makes sense.
right.
Right. So the founders have got these two eyes on two different sets of customers. There's the customers for the product and there's customers for parts of the company. Right.
Yeah,
And all the dynamics are very different. Now, traditional business, you only have one set of customers. You're trying to sell your product to customers, and that's it. Like that's there's no other thought process to it. So a lot of people come in from corporate. That's the bit where it's hard to navigate because on one hand you're going, I'm used to just selling a product to customers. I mean, that's really that's the customer. Like, what else are we trying to do here? So your founders are if you don't understand those. So what I try and do in my role, or what I've come to realize, is if you don't understand that aspect of that, it becomes a very decisions don't make any sense,
yeah,
right? You
yeah,
start making decisions, you're wondering like, why are we doing things that way? Like, and sometimes someone has to just spell it out to you and go, because the investors expect us to do that. Okay, that's the end of it. That's the
Absolutely.
end of it. Like, there's no two ways about it. And a lot of people struggle with that bit. That's the bit where there's a blind spot. So yeah, but then the reason I was saying there's lessons for us is because there's also the stages of a startup. So the stages where you're building the thing and the personalities and the characters you need to build the thing are very different from the personalities and characters you need to run the thing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
When you're building it, most times your primary customer is most likely your investors, right? The guys you're trying to say, I think I'm onto something, and I'm trying to prove to you I'm onto something. So even though you might be trying to get customers, those customers are almost coming in to try and validate for you to your investors that you're building something, right? Then when you're actually running the thing, you now need the grown-ups in the room, so to speak. You need the corporate guys who've been there before potentially to come and just proper processes, systems, and things like that, right? And at that stage now, you're trying to make sure that the actual customers on the ground are being given what they need, these systems and processes. And I think part of the challenges I've seen, and probably in the places we've worked together, without naming names, is that transition is not easy for many people. Moving from building it to running it, the people who are building it, if you try and get them to run it, they usually find that really boring and it's almost restrictive to them, right?
It's an interesting dynamic because both for the people who are building actually and also for the founders. So for the people who are building, they see the likes of me coming from at that time, coming from a corporate background. You're the inconvenience. You want to slow things
Exactly.
down. You're the
Exactly.
police.
Yeah.
Although you've got sector experience, actually you're the reason why we need startups because you're the incumbents.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
struggle and are slow and inflexible and not customer focused. But of course, for the founders, it's a real big decision point where you've got loyalty to people who've helped you build to get to the
Mm,
stage you're at. And now you need to turn around and say, well, we need to grow up. And perhaps you've got a different role in the future, or
yeah.
maybe you're not part of the answer.
Exactly.
Um, and it can't be easy for people making those decisions, but we've seen to some detriment, some organizations that have got that bit wrong. And I think having that experience and also that support where you've got
Mm,
people who've got one eye on the vision and understand how organizations need to evolve and what they need at different stages are so
mm,
crucial.
No, you're right. I mean, it's. I like the word you've used there, loyalties. Actually, that's where a lot of founders, you're torn, right? You've helped me
Yeah,
get to this stage, but now I need people to run with it and make this almost like a corporate that's got systems and processes and governance and adheres to its industry standards and practice, all the things that you are trying to break during the build stage,
yeah,
right? And now important because your real clients are demanding it, your regulators are demanding it, even your investors, actually, your later stage investors are coming in to go, we're investing in a grown-up company, right? So that challenge is very, I mean, so even for us who are trying to build new startups and things like Leap and all that, it's trying to figure out how do you balance those two things out? How do you transition from building to running it, right? And that mindset. And for people like me who enjoy the building stage, right, maybe more than even than the running stage, it's also that mind switch of going, don't spend too much time building this thing. Don't indulge yourself
yeah.
with the building because the building is also very, I mean, it's exciting, it's sexy, you're trying out new technologies, you're trying out stuff, but there's not much pressure. It's just, but that's a very indulgent stage. So.
I agree. I do think that founders need to be open-minded. It's really important. They also need to be
Mm,
accountable. Something that we've seen work well for us at the moment is having a coalition of credibility that's not involved in the day-to-day. They're
mm,
non-executive, they're providing advice. They're really experienced people, and we're accountable to them. So they can kick the tires on some ideas.
yeah.
They can help us shape, what we're doing next in terms of our roadmap, ensuring we do the right things first.
Mm.
So I think all of that's really important and perhaps something that founders don't spend enough time doing. It's easier for us to an extent because we've got such varied experiences and we can draw on them.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
even then, we're not limiting our own imaginations based on our experience. We're drawing on other people. So perhaps a lesson there actually for other founders who are navigating this.
yeah. I mean, and I think the other thing that I think that was interesting in our meeting is, like you say, yes, we've got similar values. I think we see the world relatively the same way, but we had arrived at that point, or we from very different journeys, so to speak. Obviously, I started off in corporate, in technology, in investment banking, then went off and founded my own couple of startups, one being an agency, one being a software development house, back in Kenya. Then came back, joined this fintech, when they were just now at the point where they are starting to grow globally, part of that journey. So my experiences were very much colored by both working in corporate for a while, but then also being in business or startup world for a while. And also the agencies, I worked with loads of startups. I mean, I also worked with corporates, but I worked with loads of stuff. So I was quickly aware of a lot of just the dynamics of that world, right? And it's interesting. One of the things you asked me those early days was, if you had to do things differently, what would you do? And there are a lot of lessons that I've internalized in my head. They seem obvious to me, but later on I started realizing they're even obvious to founders now. Like, even the startups I work with now, in my head I go like, this should seem obvious, but it's interesting how, yeah, just those lessons, first of all came to bear during those days at Smart, but then also they are shaping our dynamic now that we're trying to build something ourselves, right? And trying to find out the right balance between your experience versus my experience, and what's the right balance between those two things. Yeah, it's yeah. I thought that was an interesting bit. That was quite, yeah, quite a. It's still an interesting dynamic. If I'm being honest, I still think we're trying to find the right balance. I don't think we're quite there yet.
Yeah, it's very much experiential learning because it's one of those things you can read as many books as you want, but
Yeah,
until
yeah,
you're
yeah.
there, you don't appreciate it. And having the opportunity of seeing it firsthand, having a front row seat, and seeing other founders grappling with it.
Mm,
I don't think we can underestimate the value of that. Having to have that tough conversation with someone who's they've run your engineering, they've run your tech, they've run your cyber, and suddenly, actually, because we're now taking corporate money, taking money from clients, you've got all this
mm,
regulatory stuff, you now need to move into a box. Those can be quite difficult conversations for people, especially when you've been driven largely by force of personality and people being heroes all the time.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
there's a theme there, and actually super relevant to what we end up doing with Leap around learning by doing and learning from experience.
yeah. It's I think the other thing that I also found interesting was the dynamic again at Smart. Those two co-founders, right, who more or less were joint vision leaders, if you can call them that. And again, that has its own mix to the whole dynamic. So, and again, we're also going through the same thing where we're two co-founders, equal vision holders. So yeah, again, that also brings its own. So I think there's lessons from both the experiences, but also I think that as we talk about the Leap journey, all those lessons I think will resonate with quite a few people who are going, okay. In a lot of ways, it's not dissimilar to a marriage, right? You speak a hell of a lot. You're almost making decisions on every little small thing. You need consensus on almost every little small thing. There's some things you don't see eye to eye, but you have to find some way of compromising. So I remember seeing that same dynamic at Smart. I've seen it many times before. One of my my first agencies was again a co-founder. So again, I've seen that dynamic before, and it's yeah, it's similar journeys, but it's funny how they're similar, very similar, but they're also very different. So
I agree. I wonder, it might be worth maybe zooming in on that for a second. In terms of how we handle that, of course, there'll be much more detail because we'll talk about scenarios in other episodes. But in terms of having having the situation where we're both vision holders, as you say, but you could end up in fruitless pursuit of consensus on every single thing. And I think
Mm,
we went through that early on, and we got to a position where we realized actually there's a much easier way of doing this.
mm,
Rather than feeling super emotional about things. Actually, if Andrew feels strongly about this thing, then we do it because
mm,
I trust that his ambitions and his motivations are aligned to mine. He sees the world the way I see it, and he
mm,
has a slightly different lens, which means my blind spot. There are things I can't see that you can see, and I think that's something that it's taken a while for us to arrive at. Um, but I think that also speaks to the strength of recognizing that we're not the same people, that we bring
mm,
different things to the table. We trust each other. And actually, there's a healthy amount of conflict that you need when you're running and building something at the pace that we're doing it. So,
mm.
yeah, I think it's just worth throwing that in.
Yeah, and the point you make about we're different people in the sense that at some point I think I realized there's no amount of me um, talking about it, explaining it, that can replicate some of the experiences I've had for you to internalize that. And the same thing for you. There's no amount of talking, explaining, logic that will make me internalize some of the experiences you had that shape even some of your subconscious thinking. Like, so for example, for me, yes, I've gone through some very high successes and I've done some great things, some big companies, but I've also gone through some super, super lows. Like, I think I've said to you, like, when you've come all the way to the UK, you've gone to big schools, you've worked at big companies, and you've gone back home thinking you're this. Then all of a sudden, you've spent all your savings, you can't even afford to buy lunch, right? Lunch that might even cost less than £1, and you're walking around thinking, how am I in this situation, right? How have I gotten myself?
Yeah,
That's a
no,
very, very that's a life experience or personal experience that unless you've been there, like you can't explain that, right? And it's not. I don't even mean it from a bad point of view. I mean in terms of the how much it shapes you as a person. In terms of you've shared ego, you've shared. If I use that experience as an example, an experience where you've had a chance to shed your ego and go, I was so precious about my ego and how I look, and now it's been stripped away from me. And then you go, but it hasn't killed me. If anything,
yeah,
it's made me realize it's not the end of the world, right? What else comes out of that? You start to look at what friendship means from a different perspective. Your values start to mean a lot more. You start to look at what really matters to me in this whole
yeah,
mix, right?
yeah,
It's a very it's a very formative experience to go through, but you can't replicate that for anyone. I can't come and sit down with you and give you a logic and a process and say it's just one of those things. So even when we come back to now starting to create companies, right? I think remember one of the early discussions we had before we did leap. I was saying to you, failure doesn't scare me that much anymore, right? It
mm,
doesn't. And what I meant by that is these days I create because I like creating. Remember I told you like a lot of my side projects, even on that full time, I've always had a side project, and my side projects have just be my creative outlets, right?
yeah,
And I don't really care if those side projects have one user, zero users. I'll still do them anyway, right? And I'll probably still be doing them till I'm 70 or 80 because. And a lot of people will look at me and say, like, yeah, but they're not succeeding. No one's buying this stuff. I'm like, I'm not. I just enjoy the creative process, right? And it doesn't scare me for people to go, no one has actually used that product. The process of creating it was good enough for me, right?
yeah,
It's those formative experiences that I'm saying. And but I came to learn that it's not for me to try and explain that. It's for us to find the right balance between your experiences and my experiences, and somewhere in the middle, there's a balance that will make sense for the two of us. So it's
yeah.
yeah,
I
it's kind
agree,
of
and I think that's such an important word, balance, because a lot of those experiences have allowed us to overcome challenges we wouldn't have seen otherwise. And at the same time, sometimes we sit around and have conversations about we should use these experiences as assets. Because
Mm.
sometimes, it's just human nature. Something happens and emotionally a reaction kicks in, and it kicks in because of some of the experiences we've had.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and I think it speaks to, maturity, but also the humility of, us as individuals to be able to say, well, I think my reaction to this is linked to, what happened before,
Yeah.
and vice versa. So yeah, I think it's something we're still evolving and testing and improving all the time. But it's all centered by that comfort and being um, open to challenge.
Mm. Mm.
So Andrew, why exactly do you think that? And it's funny actually, the way we think, we're also reflective. Sometimes we may get to an impasse on the call, walk away,
Mm.
go and think about it, or as often as we do, wake up at 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning, you're thinking about all
Mm.
sorts of things, and suddenly it hits you, and you get a text
Mm.
message in the morning, or I get a text message in the morning saying, "Actually, I think you were right. This is what we should do." So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's really interesting.
And I must admit, I think you're much better at that than I am. You're much better at articulating when there's a tension and going, there's a tension here. I can sense it. Let's talk about it. Right. Whereas I'm not the best at going, like you said, I'm very reflective, but I'm not very good at articulating and going, there's a tension here. Let's talk about it. Right. And that's a very important skill set to bring to the table, because again, you don't want to be part of this balance we're talking about. Is oftentimes the solution is actually very straightforward. It's just articulate it and talk about it, and then you realize it's, first of all, it's not as severe as you thought it was, but it's most important. Secondly, when you talk about it, somehow there's a very easy consensus to be reached, right? But it's that, I said, I think you're much better at that. I am. It's that ability to go, listen, I don't want us to go another day without talking about this thing that I'm sensing. And listen, I'll be very honest about this. It's almost, so when you go through, I mean, I guess it's all life experiences, but especially running a business, right? Like, and also going back to the payroll thing. When you've gone through running a business, you've missed payroll a few times. You've stared into your employees' eyes and seen what it means for you not to pay them that month, and you're late on payments, and you've got a landlord chasing you for payments, right? Forget the business. From a personal perspective, it's a very traumatizing experience.
Yeah.
Right? It's and that brings its own PTSD, so to speak, right? So there's no way you're coming through that, without some scars and all that. But then,
Yeah.
so whenever you're presented a scenario that triggers that, sometimes even subconscious, you don't even think about it. Like you just react, right? I was listening this recently about reptilian mind. Like your mind just react. You don't even know what you do. You just react.
Yeah.
Right? So, but what I like about you is that because you forced me to move from a reptilian mind to a logical, then I realized, hold on a second. That was just me reacting to something that triggered something that reminded me of something else. But it's yeah. So I said I think that's a one good balance to that, to that equation, that it's not just purely, it's not just purely this previous experiences completely clouding what's currently happening, right?
It's true, but I mean, I would say though that again, going back to being so similar, with has its own challenges. We're both. I wouldn't go as far as saying conflict averse, um, but in the way we run Leap,
Mm.
we're very open to that. In the sense that the things that maybe we would accommodate and deal with in different things that we do, personal lives, other work, in fact, work we've done together, as part of a consultancy, you just endure it and just get on with it.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, when it comes to Leap and what we're doing, we've got personally limited tolerance for it. Well,
Mm.
this is our thing,
Mm.
and this thing is too big for us to accommodate some of these things that we'd be uncomfortable airing somewhere else. So we just have
Mm,
the conversation. And I think we've been better for it. And actually, both of us are doing more of that now going forward.
mm,
And again, for anybody who's contemplating working with somebody else or building with somebody else, it's more than just a great idea. It's more than this person's skill sets. It's actually
mm.
the person as a human, and yeah, that's been crucial, I think, particularly in the last 6 to 9 months. I know we'll come on to talking about the vision for Lead, on the next episode and how we built it and some of the critical milestones and so on. Um, but yeah, for me, looking back, at the start of 2025, looking back at 2024, all of those key decisions have that human aspect of the heart of it.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. And I think also it's funny how Smart, you and I had very similar ideas on the things that weren't working, especially around governance, and separation of responsibilities and the roles of IT versus engineering versus cyber and architecture and all that kind of stuff. And that bit was almost like it was so obvious to us that we just couldn't understand why it wasn't obvious to everyone else, right? And I think
Yeah,
that was a good starting point. Yeah, so it's interesting how with you and I at Smart, it was very obvious to us about things like governance and separation of duties and the role of IT and the architecture and cyber and engineering, right? So those things were almost so obvious to us, we didn't even understand why it wasn't obvious to everyone else. Like you just separate
yeah,
those responsibilities for the obvious reasons, best industry practice and all that stuff. So I think that's carried on well here, where we've easily gotten to a point where we start to understand each other's strengths, and you go, okay, that's Michael's domain, right? Content, Michael. Michael is he cares more about it, but he's also better at it, right? So that's your domain. Product, mostly my domain, and we kind of like found the right balance.
yeah,
But then it's a softer side where we've struggled a bit. So the design stuff where it's very subjective is the copywriting stuff, the copywriting styles. For some reason, those are the areas where we've had the biggest. So
yeah,
it's the and I found that very interesting. Like I kept thinking, like it's funny how copywriting, like we'd both look at the same copy and you'd feel strongly about one direction, and I'd feel strongly about one direction. I'd go, why are we spending a lot of time arguing about this stuff? Not even arguing, debating this stuff to the point where it almost gets emotional, right?
yeah,
So it's
yeah,
it's those kind of things where, and again, we're still learning, but we both learn to just go take a step back, like and find a way of delegating. If we need to bring in a third party, so be
yeah,
it,
yeah,
right? Because
yeah,
it's just it almost gets overblown. It's for the amount of conflict it creates and the amount of impact it is, it's just not, it doesn't match up, right? It just
100%.
doesn't match up. The big things we agree on, the managing the finances generally we agree on, the general product direction we generally agree on, the evolution when things have to change and we think, okay, let's take a slightly different direction, we agree on that. We work really well in front of clients, but the small things about should this word be,
Yeah,
that's where now again. So yeah, I thought that was quite interesting. But yeah, but I think even that, like you said, we're finding the right balance. We're finding ways of mitigating that by bringing in other people and go, okay, let's not you and I spend too much time thinking about this stuff. Let's delegate that to someone else. So
yeah,
yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. I mean, looking forward to the next set of episodes, just wanting to give people a sense of what they can expect. Of course, there's more dialogue about you and I and how we've got here and the
Mm,
challenges of building Leap, which is a product that's focused primarily on the public sector. So there'll be lots about startups and running Leap, and the challenges most founders go through. But I suppose there is, of course, the products. There's also the sector. There's all the stuff about AI and how that's impacting the world of work. Our
mm.
views on the world of work and the future of learning in terms of building skills for what comes next. So all of this and how we've gone about finding product market fit, how we've built our roadmap,
Mm.
how we've decided on features, the challenge of pace versus quality, Do we get this thing to a certain level of fidelity before we push it out, or do we get it out there and get people, interested using it and providing feedback? And
Yeah.
also the obvious thing of, we don't always like being out there and speaking to people and engaging, but actually the demands of the role we both have means we have to do that, and
Yeah.
doing more of that around selling and marketing and so on. So yeah, we'll talk about lots of that in the weeks ahead. But yeah, it's been fun just going back over the journey to date.
Yeah.
Of
Yeah.
course, we've not zoomed in on everything. I think some of that will come through in other conversations.
No, I agree. I think even just the evolution of the idea of leap, and we'll have to find ways of showing those early prototypes that we had, very, very early fast prototypes. But even how we
Yeah,
even decided on I think that idea of product versus service and product versus consultant, I think that conversation as to how we even started leap around that is going to be an interesting one. And again, just a good reflection as to why do you even decide to do this and what were we thinking, so but yeah, so I think it's what I like about this is that it helps us reflect, but also to articulate reasons why we did certain things, right? Because I think it's sometimes in the middle of all this, the speed of things, you forget why you made certain decisions, and in the middle of the night when you're kicking yourself and thinking, "What the hell am I doing?" What you forget why you started this thing in the first place. We forget why we decided to go for a product versus us sitting down going, "We'll always be consultants."
yeah, yeah,
You know, that
absolutely.
kind of stuff. So no, I think that's a whole other that's a good lesson to reflect on and articulate what those reasons are. So looking forward to that. Looking forward to that.
Likewise, likewise. I think that brings us to the end of this one. But thanks to people tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
All right. Take care.